From the far reaches of the Milky Way galaxy, it's Retro Nerd Girl with a film review for you. Today, I'll be reviewing the movie Jason and the Argonauts, released in 1963, starring Todd Armstrong, Nancy Kovac, and Gary Raymond. Directed by Don Chaffee. The synopsis is, the legendary Greek hero, Jason, leads a team of intrepid adventurers in a perilous quest for the legendary Golden Fleece. The story. Raymond Frederick Harryhausen was an American artist, designer, writer, visual effects creator, and producer after having seen King Kong released in 1933 at the age of 12, became inspired to make movies. At the time, it was a marvelous feature film that showcased visual effects that had never been seen before in a blockbuster film. So much so that in 1991, it became culturally, historically, and aesthetically significant by the Library of Congress. Harryhausen got in contact with the model animator who pioneered the visual effects for King Kong, Willis O'Brien, who then instructed him to take classes in graphic arts and sculpture to hone his skills. While he was still attending high school, Harryhausen took evening classes in art direction, photography, and editing. He also studied art and anatomy, which led him to his first animation job with George Pal's Puppetoons. At about the age of 27, he became an assistant animator for his first major feature film, Mighty Joe Young, released in 1949. He then teamed up with producer Charles H. Schneer, and the two kept making box office hits, such as It Came From Beneath the Sea, aka Monster From Beneath the Sea, released in 1955, Earth vs. the Flying Saucers, released in 1956, and 20 Miles to Earth, released in 1957. In 1958, Harryhausen began taking on an additional role as the associate producer on the seventh voyage of Sinbad, where he showed off his incredible talent yet again. His next project was Mysterious Island, where he first conceived of a follow-up to the seventh voyage of Sinbad on the back of the script on that set. It would be Sinbad and the Age of Muses, where Sinbad would team up with the legendary hero Jason of the Golden Fleece from Greek mythology. As the project began to come together, it was decided to remove Sinbad from the story and concentrate on Jason. The title of the film became Jason and the Golden Fleece, and it kept that name for a good while during filming. Jan Reed and Beverly Cross worked on the screenplay, adapting the original Greek poem, the Argonautica, written by Apollonius Rhodius in the 3rd century BC, which tells the myth of the voyage of Jason and the Argonauts to retrieve the Golden Fleece. They veered away from accurately telling the mythological tale based on what Harryhausen was able to create. Although Ray was not credited as a writer, his visual effects and concept art spearheaded the story and what ended up on screen. If there was ever a place to source fantastical stories of drama, tragedies, and tales of triumphant heroes, it is Greek mythology. It's akin to our modern-day superhero cinematic movie universes. Jason was a hero, and his story was a fantastic fantasy vehicle for Harryhausen's special talents. I'm a big fan of Greek mythology, Egyptian mythology, and even Viking mythology. It's all right up my alley on a cold, dark night. The story was set up a lot like a Shakespearean play, filled with intrigue, twists, turns, and surprises. It ended a little abruptly on the most part, but it was exciting. So there's a charm about it that reflects the 1960s efforts to present the public with wholesome content for the whole family. And, I don't mind the graphic content that we often see in action movies today, but I have to say that this movie really proves that you can certainly entertain an audience without it. The story is also devoid of any comedy, but doesn't lose its lighthearted appeal. And I love that about it. Now the pacing. At an hour and 44 minutes, the pacing is so tight. It's so amazing. And at every turn, it's just stuffed with either information that fills in more details about the story or exciting action. The only flaw with the pacing is that it ramps up with an amazing climax and then the story ends abruptly. Now, the challenge. The story's challenge stems from the meddling of the Greek gods on Mount Olympus for their own entertainment. The king of the gods, Zeus, and his wife Hera enjoy one game that looks like a board game with the real-life people of Greece as the game pieces. What? Their games with humans are petty and sometimes downright cruel. And, that's the real big challenge for the Greeks. Just trying to live day by day while miraculous oddities keep happening around them. There's a sense of doom and gloom to the background of the story that mortal men really have no control over what happens to them. The story starts off at the beginning of Jason's story, but there's a lot more to the story that makes it pretty awesome. And the film doesn't really get to fill the audience in on. And so you know that I had to get all nerdy and fill you in on that information. So, a while before Jason's even born, King Creathus of Leucas was married to Tyro, who had 3 sons with him. Tyro was secretly in love with the river god Eniphas. He wasn't interested in her, but Poseidon was. He disguised himself as the river god and seduced her, which conceived twins, Peleus and Neleus. The twins were raised away from the palace, but returned one day to kill Tyro's enemy in one of Hera's temples, and that is why Hera bears a lifelong hatred for Peleus. The film switches this event with Jason's sister praying to Hera and being killed by Peleus as Hera's motivation for helping Jason so much during the course of the film. And the film centers around the interaction between Hera and Zeus's power struggle. Being the son of Poseidon, Peleus has certain favor with Zeus, which protects him from Hera's outrage. She only waits for an opportunity to gain her revenge. According to the texts, Peleus thirsted after the crown of Thessaly and banished his twin, Neleus, and one of his other half-brothers. He then locked up his other 2 brothers, one of them being Aeson, the rightful king. Aeson was able to have children in captivity, but any male children that he had would be killed. So on the day of Jason's birth, the women cried loudly to cover up his newborn cries, and he was whisked away to Chiron, the centaur, who lived in the mountains and raised him there. In both the film and the texts, this just as a way to probably terrorize Peleus, a seer tells him that his doom would come at the hand of a man with 1 sandal. Now, lo and behold, years later, Jason shows up in his court missing a sandal, boldly announcing his attempts to the throne. Peleus sends him to retrieve the fleece, believing that Jason would die on the journey. In the movie, Jason is unaware that Peleus is his uncle until far into the film, whereas in the text, his identity is out in the open. I actually love that extra layer of discovery for the protagonist, and the filmmakers knew precisely how to add just a little bit more drama to an already intense story by doing this. Peleus' storyline oddly ends there, but the film devises yet another challenge in Peleus' son, Acastus. In the original story, as in the film, he earns his place among the Argonauts, but he only becomes Jason's enemy after the voyage in the text. In the film, Acastus acts as a constant thorn at Jason's side to sabotage the adventure, adding yet another layer of challenge. Many modern reviewers have commented negatively on Acastus' obvious villainy, but in my opinion, this was exactly the intention of adding such a character. When he finally faces off with Jason, you root for Jason. The audience hates that character, and I think it's brilliant, even though it's pretty obvious. The adventure itself is the main trial for Jason. The original story had the events occurring differently with quite a few moments for more adult content that was omitted from the storyline, such as the ship landing on the Isle of Lemnos, inhabited by a race of women. The Argonauts actually stayed there for a while and created a new tribe of people. Jason had even fathered twins with the queen before he finally left to complete his voyage. Now, on the voyage, there are some of the trials that were changed. They settled on the living bronze statue of Talus and the Isle of Bronze, the harpies tormenting the blind prophet Phineas, sailing between the clashing rocks, the Hydra, seven-headed serpent protecting the Golden Fleece, and the scariest of them all, the seven skeletons, otherwise known as the children of the Hydra's teeth. The end climax with the skeleton warriors was a culmination of a few wild events that seemed to stem from the additional challenge in the story, King Aeetes of Colchis. He was the son of the sun god Helios and the daughter of a titan, according to the myth. So it would make sense for him to be a powerful wizard that he is in the film. Once he shows himself to be an enemy to Jason, he gives a very valid reason for imprisoning and ultimately chasing Jason. The Golden Fleece was gifted to Colchis to preserve the peace and prosperity of his nation, along with the remarkable healing powers within the fleece. In his shoes, any great leader would act similarly. I love that character so much. He brings so much energy to the climax of the film, and I can totally identify with him. Any leader would act in this fashion. Now, the empathy. In the very beginning, there isn't much to empathize with except for Jason, since he is an enthusiastic young prince frustrated with the condition of his kingdom at the hand of Peleus and angry at the gods for not hearing the calls of the people. In fact, he doubts that they even exist. And one thing I admire about Jason is that his first move isn't always to fight, it's to talk to his enemies, rather than building an army first and approaching his uncle with force. I can't say that that was a wise move, but it's an example that Jason is vastly different from your average contender for the throne. He is so naive for not even recognizing that this nobleman that he saves from the river is actually Peleus, but it speaks of his innocence. Peleus makes a deal with Jason that if he can bring back the Golden Fleece, he'll help him to attain the throne. And I thought it was brilliant that Jason was sent to get the Golden Fleece that had healing powers when Jason's name itself means the healer. Jason is the rightful heir to the throne. And what the film doesn't tell you is that he is also the great-grandson of Hermes, the messenger god. So it makes sense that the film orchestrates that Hermes take him to Mount Olympus to speak with Zeus and Hera in person, so then he can believe in the gods. Although the gods are a part of the challenge, they are also part of the solution here. Well, at least Hera is. Hera in the film has taken a liking to Jason and has agreed to help him 5 times because that was the number of times his sister called out to her in her temple. And a little background about Hera, she is actually the sister wife of Zeus. Eek! Things were really strange in the ancient world, and this was quite common. Hera is charmed by Zeus, but he cheats on her constantly, making her feel scorned and humiliated. Since she cannot do anything to harm Zeus directly or seek a lover of her own, she takes out her fury on the other goddesses and mortal women that he seduces, as well as their offspring. In many tales of Greek mythology, she is the antagonist, terrorizing the heroes, who are often demigods. However, for Jason's story, she is doing everything she can to help him get the fleece. In the film, the events between Hera and Zeus play out much like a playful teasing, contemptuous plotting, intellectual debates, and finally, a loving acceptance of their relationship as it is. Hera's help does well to send Jason off to his task, giving him vital information in his encounter with his first trial, Talos. But out of desperation, he uses his last chance to get help from Hera at the very end of his first mission to convince the crew not to abandon him. She does interfere once more at the Clashing Rocks as a means to make a move during her world board game with Zeus. Jason's ship, the Argo, was built by Argus with the help of the gods and acts as its own character along with the bravery, sweat, and blood of its crew. The list of Argonauts, according to the myth, is a list of miraculous heroes, kings themselves, and demigods. In the film, Argus and Acastus are highlighted as well as Hercules, or, according to his Greek name, Heracles, the son of Zeus and Alcmene. As the original story, the film gives us a little love story with Medea. In the film, she is a priestess and a dancer at the temple of Colchis. Her ties to the king is not exactly clear, but in the original story, she is the daughter of King Aeetes of Colchis. And as a little background, in the poem, Hera persuaded Aphrodite to convince her son Eros to make Medea fall deeply in love with Jason in order to use her skills as a sorceress to help Jason no matter the cost. Although this juicy plot point was removed from the movie, it could supply a good reason why Medea is so quickly and ready to betray her king and people for this stranger. It always seemed a bit odd to me, but after learning that bit of information, it makes perfect sense. Before I move on, I just want to talk to you a little bit about one standout character, Hercules. I think we're all mostly familiar with the background of Hercules and his trials, but I think it's interesting that Apollonius added him to the story. He's a hero at this point, but he hasn't gone through the trials, so he's a bit immature and he isn't quite a Hulk at this point. However, his personality is so lively and charismatic that it brings a lot more of that lighthearted fun into the film. What a wonderful addition. Now the technical aspects. John Chaffee was the director for hire, with a clear understanding that he was to carry out the film's direction following Charles Sneer and Ray Harryhausen's instructions to the letter. Even though Harryhausen was involved in the script development, art direction, design, storyboards, and the tone of the film, he couldn't claim director's credit on his films due to the rules of the Directors Guild of America. However, everyone knew his films because they were well known for their amazing visuals that broke new ground during its time. He would perform most of his miniature work by himself, which kept the cost down low, and it ensured that he was in full creative control of what ended up on screen. His father built the metal armatures that were skeletons for each model, while Harryhausen's mother assisted with some of the miniature costumes. Each stop-motion model was animated 1/8 of an inch per frame that nearly seamlessly interacted with live-action scenes, and it was coined Dynamation. Not to be mistaken with claymation, which was most associated with clay plasticine figures. The live-action portion of the film was shot a year prior, with the actors acting out all the scenes with phantom monsters. Then Ray Harryhausen would use it as a background miniature rear screen with his models animated in front of it. It was re-photographed to combine those two elements together. To make the animations appear to be sandwiched between the foreground and the background, elements were matted out in black and then filmed on top. Genius. Absolute genius. Talos was the first creature to astound Jason and the Argonauts. Originally, he was only supposed to be about 8 feet tall, but ended up being inspired by Sergio Leone's Colossus of Rhodes, released in 1961. This massive living statue was actually a miniature that was about 14 inches tall. Brilliantly, the movement of the creature along with screeching metal sounds sold the effect, in my opinion. When Talos turns his head to look at his little tiny enemies, it sent shivers through me of dread of how impossible it would be to even attempt to defeat such a creature. This inspired the Amazon scene in the movie Star Crash in 1979. Each monster had their own movement that suited their physiology, but also had classic Harryhausen model movement characteristics that fans know and love about his remarkable work. When I was a little girl, I saw this movie sometime in the early 70s, and I was completely engrossed by the Hydra and the 7 skeleton scenes. I had never seen anything like it, and there was a deficit of such entertainment. It was wondrous, and it took Harryhausen at the height of his powers as an artist to animate each of the Hydra's heads and remember their placements. For the skeletons, he shot about 13 to 14 frames per day, and it took 4.5 months, which turned out to be 3 of the most exciting minutes in cinema history. Here's a bit of interesting information for us. Originally, the skeletons had rotting flesh hanging from their bones, but the censors thought it was too gruesome, so they were reshot just as plain skeletons. I just love that scene so much because it's so full of energy and it sets up with a whole lot of suspense by the enthusiastically vengeful King Aietes. The technical storytelling of how vicious and unbeatable the skeleton warriors are is evident in the fact that Jason doesn't actually defeat the skeletons. They simply stop chasing him once they fall in the water, which seems to break the magic that created them. Bernard Herrmann created the score, and it was the 4th collaboration with Ray Harryhausen and Schneer. One of his trademarks happens to be recycling his own material from prior works. However, there is no lack of effectiveness. Every passage is used in service of storytelling brilliantly, as well as giving us an ancient Mediterranean flavor in the music. At precisely the right moment, the music is full of seduction, dread, foreboding, and triumph. It helped to make everything seem so urgent when it comes to the action. It's so turbulent and expressive. Yes, the music is yet another sensational character in the film. The performances. Well, the acting is old-fashioned and the voice audio was dubbed, all of the characters, which sometimes sounds unnatural. I think in a lot of international films they would actually shoot without any sound, and that was a typical thing that happened, and then voiceovers were added. With that being said, there are quite a few standouts that really stole every scene that they were in. Jason was a combination of a physical screen performance by Todd Armstrong and the vocal performance by Tim Turner. Todd Armstrong was enthusiastic and wide-eyed in his first and last leading role. After listening to his real voice in a few television shows he appeared in, I thought it would have worked just fine for him in the film. It was a missed opportunity that could have had a positive effect on his career. Visually, he projected his lines with a lot of energy, even though you don't get to hear his voice. Nancy Kovac was actually an excellent actress. You only need to see the work that she did on Bewitched from 1964 to 1969 as 2 reoccurring characters. Her voice was perfectly fine, but it was also dubbed by another actor. It took a little something away from her performance. However, there is no denying that her physical performance is captivating during her short time on screen as Medea. One clear standout for me was Honor Blackman, who played the goddess Hera with regal elegance while also knowing when to show her character's warmth. I'm really happy that she wasn't dubbed because she has such a special voice, and many of us really know her best as the character Pussy Galore in the movie Goldfinger, released a year later in 1964. Now my enjoyment. The film has one heck of an ending that feels a little bit unfinished. Right after barely escaping those savage 7 skeleton warriors, the voyage concludes with little to no closure about what happens after the fleece is presented to Pelias. But I think that's probably the best that they could do at the time, because after that, everything really goes bananas for Jason and Medea in this Greek mythology. It gets so messed up that Medea has her own fame in Greek mythology from Euripides' tragedy Medea. Medea killed her own brother, dismembered him just to distract her father as the ship escaped. Jason married Medea and they had children together. Pelias refused to give up his throne, so Medea tricked his own daughters to kill him. Acastus didn't approve of her schemes, but since being the son of Pelias, became the king and banished Jason and Medea. The couple ended up in Corinth. Jason, out of desperation, arranged to marry the daughter of the king of Corinth for political reasons. So where does Medea fit in his future? To Medea's credit, she tried to talk to him about it, but he was actually really cocky about the whole thing and mentioned that Medea did everything that she did for him only because she was under a spell, which was kind of not true. She truly did love him. But she was also hurt because she turned her back on her people. In the film, it shows Jason doing a lot of the work to win all of the trials he went through. However, in the Greek mythology, Medea is the one who really helped him through every single trial. And she killed her own brother, she betrayed her father, only to be discarded for a political arrangement. And that hurt a lot. But her reaction was over the top. Medea killed the king of Corinth, Jason's bride as well, and even her 2 boys that she had with Jason. As vile as all of that is, she was still protected by the gods as she fled to Athens on a chariot of dragons sent to her by her grandfather, the sun god Helios. Eventually, even Zeus was so taken with her that he tried to seduce her, but she refused, citing that it would insult Hera. For that, she ended up living on Mount Olympus among the gods and married Achilles. Now, sadly, in the true tale, Jason lost favor with Hera because he broke his promise to be faithful to Medea and then died unhappy and in misery. Interestingly enough, at the end of this film, when it ends the way it does, I'm okay with it because we know this is truly the highlight of Jason's story. I love it that the gods say that for now they will leave Jason to a short time of victory, and for the time being, even the gods amongst themselves are at a temporary truce with one another. The film was titled Jason and the Golden Fleece until about 3 months before the release date. There were a few posters and title screens that can be found. However, there was a rumor that an Italian film with that same name actually beat the movie to the theaters, starring Steve Reeves. It must have been a bit of a mix-up because there's no such movie on record. Nevertheless, believing the rumor, the name was changed to Jason and the Argonauts just to alleviate any confusion should there ever be one. The way the film ends, everyone expected a sequel, and that would have buffered the blow. But there could have been a number of reasons that it didn't occur, such as the fact that it was a box office disappointment at the time, and audiences' tastes were changing. However, fans of the film rose over the years to make this movie a cult classic early on in the 60s and the 70s. I do remember seeing this when I was really, really little in the 1970s, and anytime thereafter, it was a family tradition to huddle around the television to watch its TV airings. We were in great company for our love of the film because even Ray Harryhausen regarded this as his best film of his career. Ray was also recognized for his contribution to film by receiving the Gordon E. Sawyer Award at the Oscars' Science and Technical ceremony in 1992. Tom Hanks was the host of the event and famously said, "Some people say that Citizen Kane, 1941, or Casablanca, released in 1942, are the best movies ever made. But I say Jason and the Argonauts is the greatest movie ever made." Ray Harryhausen went on to make more incredible films using his incredible dynamation effects, such as a few of my favorites, The Golden Voyage of Sinbad, Sinbad and the Eye of the Tiger, and Clash of the Titans, and you know I will be reviewing those in the future. Ray also had a long list of filmmakers who were inspired by his work, such as Steven Spielberg, Peter Jackson, Joe Dante, Tim Burton, James Cameron, Guillermo del Toro, George Lucas, John Lasseter, John Landis, J.J. Abrams, and Wes Anderson, just to name a few. And although the art form of stop-motion animation has been pretty much replaced on the most part by CGI, it's still being used as a storytelling vehicle for many animated films, and it's always so much fun to see. In the year 2000, Jason and the Argonauts was made into a mini-series. It was a fine mix between being a remake of the movie in 1963, but added a lot more story plot lines from the actual poem, and I actually enjoyed it a lot. It was, I don't know, there's something about it, and we had such great actors like Frank Langella, who was excellent as King Aetes. We had so many great actors. We had Angus McFadden, who I always love seeing on screen. We had Dennis Hopper, Brian Thompson, Adrian Lester, Kieran Hines, Jason London as Jason, Natasha Henstridge, Jolene Blaylock as Medea. A lot of really good actors and actresses were in this film, and it was really well done as far as trying to make it look very authentic and real, except for a great deal of awkward CGI effects that you kind of have to grit and bear if those things are kind of an eyesore for you. But the story was pretty solid. It's a solid story, and it had a lot more detail about the characters than the 1963 film could ever cover due to time constraints of trying to squeeze everything into a feature film. And the bottom line of it, I just really enjoyed the storytelling a lot. It's definitely not a better movie. You know, my favorite is always going to be the 1963, but I enjoyed the 2000 miniseries. This nearly 60-year-old movie is a wonderment to the age from which it came from, as well as the spectacular action-packed fantasy adventure tailored by the godfather of special effects. Each creature plucked from raw imagination, framed around the magnificent Greek myths in the Bronze Age, the age of the heroes, to endure adventure and the human moral dilemma of good versus evil. My rating is a 9.5. Well, that sums up my review. I hope you liked it, and if you did, I've got over 100 of these videos, so go on and browse the channel to see more reviews from me like this. Subscribe if you haven't done so already, and hit the bell icon to be the very first to be notified of my next video. I also want to take this moment to recognize my wonderful, awesome, amazing Patreon supporters who are responsible for helping me to produce this video. Many thanks to these incredible movie lovers for their support. And you too can be on this list by heading over to Patreon and get a bit of behind the scenes stuff that you don't get on YouTube from me. This is Retro Nerd Girl signing off. Take care, movie lovers. I'm off to my next review.